With this, I would take the permission to share some of my views on Tagore. So the paper is heavily summarized because there's a shortage of time, and what I have done is I've kind of tried to give the entire summary of what Tagore had to say in his work Nationalism, particularly the chapter which is there as a which is critiquing West and is trying to show the importance of Indians in three basic outlines. First is the shortcomings in the Western tradition, particularly when Tagore was writing, for international world as well as for Indians about the situation that existed in Europe. So if you see, Tagore was writing at the time between the world wars, and was the time when when the European imperialism was at its peak and the most ugly and the dreadful outcomes were coming forth. So it is kind of sort of a compulsion, I would say, for enlightened thinkers like Gandhi, Tagore, and many others to really question and challenge these things. So this work that I'm going to talk about Tagore is one of the reflections of that. So I would just summarize the main points. And I would do that by reading certain portions from my paper. So, if you see, Tagore wrote a work on nationalism, and in his work, he has said that we must admit that history has always been full of struggle, and the lack of solutions to these struggles have led to death and degradations and also loss of civilizations of the world. However, Tagore says that one alternative that we can think is perhaps to find easy solutions to problems. But easy solutions are not meant to be. In fact, it is the deeper solutions which are important, and they may be difficult, but they are important to be achieved. And this is exactly what he thinks that the West can learn from the Indians in their outlook to change themselves. For them, they have always thought that things have come easy, and the easiest and the shortest path are the best solutions for the path. So he says further that and India, unlike today as it is conceived, that is around at the time of 1940s and 30s, has been an entity of no nations as the European idea of notion exists, and it has always tried to live peacefully and with the idea of beyond borders. So this whole idea of nationhood in terms of border has been a very, very imperial idea. So what is the meaning of nation is something which for the West, according to Tagore, is comprising of dominance of power, which goes above, or some kind of transcendental of humanity. It leads, or it only understands the idea of control which has no limits. And then he says that, so thereby their organization for an easy solution is control of power in their politics and commerce and economics ways. And even their military science that they have developed is extremely cruel. So Tagore goes on to say that the Europeans have had a way in which has actually challenged the entire harmony of life. And he says that India has been, for of course a number of years, has been ruled by West, which has led to the privatization of power at the cost of human values and emotions, and ultimately has hampered the happiness of man across the globe. British India, even though he say capable, have set aside their spiritual possibilities and awakening, and they have come up with the idea of nation, which is like a spear. So he is, giving a very strong critique and polemic against the Westerns in a literary as well as a philosophical manner. He goes on to say that the integral variety that we expect allows others to contribute to Indian concept of nation. However, there was a transition from a moral and a complete man to a political and commercial man with the advent of the Britishers. Tagore points out, however, that a person is not intrinsically bad, but only the actions of a person are. So, what is pretty against the West is not against them, but against their actions and their ideologies and the methods of tyranny. Tagore so has to explain the idea of his nation against the Western concept of nation, gives an example of handloom as versus the idea of power loom. He says where a handloom gives the importance to a person's living at a basic tenets of need, use of fingers and hands representing diversification of culture and life and authenticity of the person working. Power load represents passivity, authority, mechanistic, lifeless, accurate, and monotonous existence. So power load is a machine which creates things in an artificial manner, and the man becomes passive. Handloom is something which creates things through hands, where a person is involved. And in the time of independence, Charkha was one example of in handloom. So, Tagore gives that example, and he clearly shows through this analogy that how West have been making people only passive slaves of machinery. He goes on to say further that Tagore believes that the troubles should be solved, on the other hand, by aborting the exercise of force on people or citizens on what is to be done. Alluding to the concept of Swaraj or self-rule by Gandhi, Tagore states that the true sense of oughtness, autonomy, and freedom to evolve should come from within. Enforcement of the law in the West is to create fear of law. So